Hey everybody, it's G Marks, and thanks again for joining me for another episode of Biz Books, where I talk to great authors who write great books about or somewhere near about business. Today, my guest is Matt Higgins. Matt has written Burn the Boats, Toss Plan B Overboard, and Unleash Your Full Potential. This is like a pump you up kind of book, Matt, right? It is. It's an inspiring book and a great book, and I'm glad you wrote it. Thanks so much, first of all, for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pump you up with some nuance, not
Yeah.
just bombastic, simplistic pump you up, but with nuance woven throughout, and hopefully good storytelling to keep you captivated.
It is, and it keeps you inspired as well. And we'll dig into some of what we mean in some of the terms. Yeah, but first of all, a little bit about you, Matt. So, how did you come to write the book, and what do you do?
So I've had many hats, as you would expect from the person claiming the mantle of burn the boats, right? I've burned many boats in many chapters, but the most important thing to know about me, the framework is I grew up in abject poverty in Queens, New York, and the product of a single mom. And a lot of my early years were framed around doing everything I could to make ends meet, selling flowers on street corners and handbags at flea markets and scraping gum at McDonald's. And so just true abject poverty. I have a box of government cheese sitting right behind me that I keep it as a memento so I don't forget from whence I come. But my burn the boats move that inspired this book was a hack that I came up with when I was a kid, and which is basically to drop out of high school at 16 years old and get my GED. Back then, you were allowed to start college theoretically before your class even, if you did well enough. And the burn the boats move for me was this insane plan was met with derision, as you might imagine, from officialdom. And I realized that the only way I would actually go through with it, even though my instinct said it was right for me, was to burn the boats, to sabotage any ability for me to retreat. So I failed every single class for over 2 years, and I wasn't like a hoodlum, so it was a pretty radical decision. And we could go deeper, but dropped out of high school. I go to college, returned to my prom as a completed my first year of college and on the debate team, and it really compounded a tremendous amount of professional success into a very short period of time. But that's what inspired the book.
That is amazing. So what do you do now? Like, how do you, besides making millions of dollars off this book, what else do you do to earn a living?
Yeah. So just to summarize, I have created my own firm in partnership with Stephen Ross, who's a big developer, owner of the Miami Dolphins. I've had a meandering career in sports. I used to
Hmm.
oversee the Jets and eventually oversaw the Miami Dolphins as vice chair. And we built this consumer-facing portfolio of great companies. Version 1.0 was to incubate. Some may know Resi, the reservation system, we
Sure.
sold to Apple. Version 2.0 was to acquire companies outright. So we own Magnolia Bakery for those who have a sweet tooth. Partners with David Chang, a lot of food companies, a lot of sports, entertainment, tech. So I sit upon what's well over $1 billion consumer portfolio of brands, and I teach at Harvard Business School, direct to consumer, e-com, and I am evangelical about my book. That's who I am at the moment.
That is amazing. So, man, so if just if you met me at a party somewhere and I was just like, hey, man, like, what do you do for a living? Would you call yourself an author? Would you call yourself an investor, general entrepreneur,
That's a
sales
great question.
guy, development guy? I don't need you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I'm an entrepreneur, even though I hate the word. It's so
Me too.
cliche. I would say honestly, I build and buy businesses and fix ones that are broken.
Cool.
I would give myself a full sentence probably. I hate private equity word. I don't like investor because I actually think it minimizes what I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I helped oversee the rebuilding of the World Trade Center, so I have operating skills. I'm not
Right.
just an investor. I get my hands in and I need the dough.
Yeah, it's fair enough. I mean, if I were to describe you, I would call you a builder, and in a
Yeah,
construction sense,
exactly.
you're a builder.
Well, thank you.
And you've had a great career just doing that. Okay, let's get into the book. Okay, so you've learned a lot. This is your opportunity to share what you've learned over this career that you've had. Talk to me. It strikes me when I talk to people that run businesses, everybody approaches problems and leadership in a different way. In 2023, people were like data driven business. Everything's got to be data driven. Those are the decisions we need to be making. It's got to be, information based. You basically make the point that the data is secondary to succeeding. And, your belief is that people need to make a gut sandwich. So first of all, explain to me what a gut sandwich is and explain to me why you think the data is secondary.
Yeah, I think actually the word data itself is almost hindsight bias, right? It only can be perfectly constructed in retrospect. And so what I mean by a gut sandwich is that the biggest innovations and insights begin with intuition, for which there is very little evidence to support it, and the magnitude of an opportunity or intuition has an inverse relationship to the amount of evidence there is to support it.
Right.
So, in other words, you're early, and then everyone looks for validation in the form of, and we could call this broadly data. My friend Bob thinks it's a great idea, or there's a study, or there's something on the internet. We look for validation, otherwise known as data. But the green light is never given by data. Like the
Right.
best decisions aren't launched because it's there. They conclude or they're launched with intuition. So it's a gut sandwich, and the simplest illustration of that is Steve Jobs. I mean, when he decided, he had an intuition that other people would like to carry their Beatles collection in their pocket too, and I'm going to create a device that people don't even know what they need. There was little. The right incrementalist approach would have been to take the CD Walkman and iterate on it,
Yeah.
but he launched the what was it called, the iPod. So and then, so that's the bottom line. To me, it feels like master of the obvious, but somebody had to say it and call nonsense on this data-driven approach. So it's not really.
It's funny that you take that point of view, because you would think that it'd be a contrary point of view, and maybe it would have been even a few years ago. But I don't know if you feel the way, Matt. Like even coming out of COVID, with and social and the internet the way it is now, there is a lot of data that's out there, and let's face it, people we all have seen people take data and make it support whatever narrative they wanted to support, which basically means that the data itself only has so much value, and in the end, you're right. Data has some value, but in the end, it's the people that have vision and they have guts, that are going to base their decisions. It's not the world does not just run on data because that's also subjective. Does that make sense?
It does. And 2 points to follow up on that.
Sure.
I was just having a lovely conversation with my son this morning about how, and I'm trying to demonstrate to this end through mentoring, but how we all think we need an information asymmetry. There's an information arbitrage. You're going to learn something other people don't know. That's actually not the reality. That's not the kind of arbitrage or asymmetry you should be looking for. It's insight asymmetry, the ability to synthesize information and data that's readily available to everybody. And then what do you do with it? And what do you do with it is framed by the context of your life, your intelligence, your receptivity. Your second point about how people use data as either a tool to manipulate the world or frame reference. I use it as a way to manipulate myself. I talk about this in a book a little bit. I wrote this book so I would read this book. I am the anxiety-laden, angst-ridden, imposter syndrome person who needs this book. And whenever I stumble upon, particularly insomnia, I've had these life moments where I'm so mad at myself that I haven't been able to sleep. One of them was the Paris Marathon, and I'd been up for 2 days, and I'm like, "Damn you! Like, why do you
Yeah.
do this?" And I was like, you know what? I bet you this is a study of people who are deliberately sleep deprived. And I bet you that physical performance doesn't suffer nearly as much as mental performance. And running a marathon is physical. And I found a study of some Danish cyclists. Of course, they were tortured and weren't allowed to sleep, and they
Of
performed
course.
just. So I use data. It's like almost like an inside joke as a form of self manipulation. And whenever I have a problem, I'll find a study from Harvard or somewhere to make me feel better.
It's funny that you actually say that, and I think that's really, really true. And it's first of all, we all suffer from imposter syndrome. I mean, everybody does, whether they admit it or not. And it's almost as if data has become a crutch to say, well, I don't know if people can tell that I'm bullshitting or not. So I'm going to find this study from Harvard that says supports my point of view. So therefore, I must be okay.
Yeah.
But you can't make decisions based on that. The other point that I have on that, and I know we got to move on, but it's just an interesting point is that I run a 10-person company outside of Philadelphia, right? So I make decisions, my clients make decisions, smart people. I mean, I work with some really smart owners of companies. They have data, but let's face it, the last 10% of their decision is a gut. Like when you're hiring somebody, and what more important decision can you make in your business? If you're going to hire a key person, you're looking at their resume and you're, getting referrals and you're, having other people interview them and getting input. That's all data. But in the end, it's just like a leap of faith. Like, I hope this guy knows what he's doing. Do you know what I mean?
And,
So,
I'm passionate about it because I love this phrase Italians, right? It says the fish rots from the head, Italian, but it's that most problems that you see downstream in a corporation could trace back to leadership, right? But
Right.
I think the reason why we become overly reliant on data in the context is because psychological insights don't scale. Like, you can't have some kid who just graduated out of McKinsey reduce EQ to a report. So we over rely, on data. And in my experience, the greatest outcomes I've had in business are when I accepted that phrase from the Italians, and I tried to figure out, when I had a CEO who's under indexing for self-awareness, I asked why. And like, that's the problem, not some downstream problem or he can't retain good talent, or it's been the fact that he requires interventions in order to make these moves. So why are they not embracing self-awareness? So my entire career, and me personally, has been a series of leveling up based upon either personal interventions, but honestly embracing this idea that most of it's about intuition and psychology way more than data.
Yeah, you are 100% right. And I think intuition and psychology plays an enormous role. You wrote some point in the book, and I forget where, about a drone company that you invested in, where everybody was making fun of you for doing that, and yet you had a lot of faith in the owner. And if you can talk a little bit about that, having empathy for the people that you're investing in, the people that you're working with, and empathy in yourself, you talk about as well. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think for me, my source of empathy is I witnessed powerlessness when I was a kid, and my mother ultimately succumbed on the day I became press secretary to the mayor of New York. I tell that story. I went from 375 McDonald's to eventually actually making 100 grand a year, and then she dies that morning, right?
Right.
And my
Uh,
empathy is encased within that trauma, which I keep raw and fresh, so that when I meet a single mother who's doing the same thing, or I meet somebody stumbling and powerless, I can approach it from a perspective of empathy. So,
hmm,
aside from being, I think, the ethical right thing to do, empathy is actually very strategic and useful in a business context because it gives you a 360 view on a person, right? So,
mhm.
I get asked a lot, okay, Matt, you talk about self awareness as the greatest arbitrage entirely within our control in business and personal life, but how do you cultivate it in a corporation or in a leader? And I say, it's actually quite simple. You can't preach it, you can't intellectualize it, you can model it. And the way you model, actually, the unlock for empathy and for self-awareness is to create space by allowing yourself to be shockingly vulnerable.
Mm,
So my book is somewhat an exercise in modeling what it takes to create space for self-awareness and vulnerability, because I share things I don't want to share. I share about my testicle being removed and I'm infertile and get radiated, and I talk about being divorced, which I can't ever read that page.
mm.
Talk about my becoming, because I want to illustrate what does it mean to cultivate self-awareness. So, long story short, empathy is really important. But if you don't have self-awareness, it's hard to get to empathy because you're closed off. Yeah. And I believe the greatest unlocks I've ever had professionally are when I was able to model something shockingly vulnerable,
Mm,
and a CEO, a leader, felt like, oh, you didn't die. To be your
yeah.
life didn't fire. No one fired you because you shared about your one testicle, whatever it is. And those have been the greatest breakthroughs.
But you also think that, I mean, you come across a pretty genuine guy. I mean, we've only been speaking for a few minutes, and you've already talked about imposter syndrome and showing being empathy and being vulnerable and being really being transparent with yourself. I mean, you've made investments in different companies, you've built partnerships with different companies. We all know in the end that it's all about trust. And I just get the feeling that people look at you and the people that have gone into business with you and the people that you've gone into business with, you look at each other and you're like, all right, this guy seems like he's being pretty honest. I mean, he's sharing with me about losing his testicle or being, infertile, or you can't get
Yeah,
more transparent than that.
right.
That kind of transparency really makes a big difference in a business relationship, let alone
And
personal.
I think where it doesn't resonate with, there's a certain percentage of the population it's a sociopath or a narcissist. So let's
Yeah,
put
of
that on.
course.
And
Yeah.
some do manifest at the CEO founder level. So like, let's asterisk my somewhat Pollyannish view of the world. But I think most of us, though, really are on a journey of self-discovery. We don't know who put us here, why we're here, where we're going,
Right.
and what we're capable of. And so we're all in a journey of discovery. And I do think being so candid does create these opportunities for tremendous breakthroughs. I think where people do get frustrated with me, if I'm holding myself accountable, is I'm doing a lot of different things,
Yeah.
and it might feel good to be around me and have these conversations, and then when my attention gets distracted, it might feel not abandoned, but like, where'd you go? And I'm one spending a lot of my time feeling guilty and a lot of time dealing with people who are disappointed that I don't provide more. Again, I'm because you're being so nice to me, I feel now the need to disavow the compliment and be honest.
No, I
Um,
understand. I understand that, and we all have our weaknesses. Have you found this tougher to do over the years, Matt? Like to be transparent and to be as empathetic and honest when, I don't know, like maybe there's a young woman in the room who doesn't want to hear about you losing your left testicle. Do you know what I mean? Like
oh,
there's a line. Have you
yeah,
found it to be more of a challenge?
no, first of all, it's clinical, so I feel like I'm allowed to talk about losing my left test all day long. But right one, by the way. But yeah,
Oh, it's your right one. Sorry. Okay.
no, but it's a great question. I don't think so. Here's what I love. I'm sure you I don't know how old you are, right? But I'm 48. What is
58.
great about life, it brings all of us to our knees in a very humbling, sometimes humiliating way. But the gift is, oh, oh shit, we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
And nothing matters. And so the
Right.
greatest gift of a little bit older is you regret because you wish you didn't waste so much time on it. Nobody cares about your stumbles because they're completely obsessed with
Yeah.
themselves. But you actually have less time left, and that raises the stakes of being intentional and focused, but it lowers the stakes in terms of you caring about anything. You just don't have the luxury anymore. And I love that. I feel much more liberated. I know intellectually, I feel like I have a lot of the codes in that book, humbly, but I haven't always been able to implement it. It's still a work in progress to actually practice what I preach, but it's getting easier as I get older because I care less.
All right. Other things in the book that caught my attention, I thought would be interesting. You talk about reasons why people walk away from opportunities or they give up. And again, you keep denying it, but this is it's an inspiring book. It's a motivational book. And one of the biggest reasons that people give up is they say, I've already put in so much time, energy, and money that I can't let this thing go, or that this is not a, I can't make changes, in my life or in my business. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because that
Yeah,
happens to a lot of us. That's happened to you.
no, that's great. And maybe I could just go rewind half a
Sure.
second to sort of set up the premise of the book itself and this how it all relates to this idea of burn the boats. Just quick, without doing a history lesson, I was always fascinated that Cortez is, it's ascribed to him, but he just had a better marketing campaign. Like it goes back to the beginning of recorded history.
Hmm.
This idea that in order to summon the best of you, you need to actually eliminate optionality, particularly retreat.
Right.
And I was wondering, why is that? Why are we accept that in a military context? These fabled generals, but we reject it in our personal life, and we're cultivated, conditioned to believe that you need a backup plan. And when I did the research and the great study at Wharton demonstrated that just thinking about Plan B, one, materially limits the likelihood you'll be successful in Plan A, but it also makes you less motivated intrinsically. So that always, fascinated me, the relationship to those things.
Hmm.
And then what I wanted to do is deconstruct in this book, what are the metaphorical boats in our life that hold you back? Like what are, it's not just retreat, it's anything that makes you, look over your shoulder.
Hmm.
And those are buckets of imposter syndrome and our, anxiety and all these different, other avenues that I go into, right? We all have our medical metaphorical boats that we need to burn. So I find with people, when they continue to do the thing that doesn't make sense anymore, it's because they failed to define what are they burning the boats for. So I always say you burn the boats for goals, not tactics, right? You need to burn. So a lot of people, when they create a business, they think the business was the goal. The business is just a manifestation of a desire to be free,
Hmm.
to have autonomy, to not have a boss, maybe to leave a legacy, whatever your meta goal is. But most people aren't rigorous enough in thinking it through. So
Right.
they say, if this business doesn't work out, I am doomed. And as a result, they become a Harvard case study and an escalation of commitment. So I, 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 I'm a very realistic person. When people reject this idea, burn the boats, Matt, it sounds irresponsible. I have a whole matrix for how to process risk. But most importantly, I think people cling to bad ideas and continue to pursue them because they think they'll never have another good one.
Yeah, that's
And
a good
it's
point.
really important to know you're capable of coming up with a good idea. You're capable of coming up with an even better idea. And that's the thing you should be stressed about. You should be stressed about future Matt and the opportunity cost of pursuing this idea today. And most people are stressed about abandoning that particular idea.
I mean, there's also a level of laziness in there as well. I mean, I'm 58 years old, so I've been running my business now for 25 years. We implement CRM, like customer relationship management software. It's a very niche business. I enjoy the business, but there's only so much growth that I can have in it. There's only so much money I can make with it, and yet I'm doing the exact same thing that you just said. I mean, I am completely at fault of that. If I was going to burn the boats, I would get rid of this business because there are 3 or 4 other ideas that I have in the tech sector that I think would be a lot more profitable and a lot more challenging to do. But I'm lazy. I mean, I'm older. I'm 58, and I don't know. I don't feel like I was 20 years ago. I've got like the energy or the enthusiasm or the interest to start up a whole new tech business. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh
So
yeah, 100%. Well, are you being lazy or are you intentional? Or are you happy? I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day,
I'm
like,
happy.
well, let's talk, so to that, and I talk about this in a book a little bit, but I wish I talk about more. People always ask, because again, the premise of the book is that the joy of living is striving, this perpetual growth mindset, which I 100% do believe. But how
Right.
do you make sure that you're staying on that path? For me, I ask a simple question of myself every day, every week, and it's borrowed from a zoning context. I don't know if it's in your notes, but it's what is the highest and best use of my time and resources today?
Right.
That's such a fundamental question because we are iterative creatures. We are evolving. We're not standing still, better or worse. And so, in land use, the reason why they asked that question is a warehouse in Chelsea in 1920 was where you slaughtered cows. Now it's where Taylor Swift has like her own indoor swimming pool or whatever she's got in Tribeca, right? So
Right.
we are the same way. I ask now you, it sounds like you're asking yourself that question and you're like, I should probably level up. But sometimes when we don't, it's because we were arrived at a place, all things considered, we're pretty happy and
Yeah.
content with, and it's not
Yeah.
worth, disrupting it. So,
Yeah.
but you're doing this, yes?
But I'm still making the same excuses, and yet, I guess everybody has their reasons. I continue to move on only because there's just so many other questions I had for you. You do give some advice on starting a business as well, Matt, and like, if you're going to burn the boats, and you talk about what's called proprietary insights, and that topic is so because I think your point is, well, I've read what your point is that anybody can say you don't have to like recreate the wheel. You don't have to be like super innovative. You don't have to start Uber or Airbnb. There are plenty of businesses that are out there that you could go into a similar business, but if you bring your own proprietary insights into it to just make it that much better. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah, I love that. This is one of the best parts about being an author is you get to put words to things that
yeah,
don't have language. And I remember going to college in sociology or anthropology. I'm like, these are just made up terms, but then I get to make my own now. So proprietary insight is my way to capture a very powerful idea. And I philosophically always believe lower the bar. If you can lower the bar to action, lower the bar. Don't. And we subconsciously or inadvertently raise the bar to launching a business, raise the bar to changing a job. We raise it and we don't even realize we're doing it to ourselves, right? So the word proprietary insight is a way to lower the bar about what to launch a business. A lot of Americans what business launching or creating looks like from Shark Tank, but that's actually a myth. Shark Tank's all about patents and inventions largely, and most
right,
people will never have an idea, but that's not where businesses come from. And I use the example in the book of Airbnb, like some kid named Brian, who's a good friend now, but happens to sleep on a futon in 2009 and is like, sounds like this would be a good business. To me, that would be absolutely insane to think that somebody's going to be in my house and not steal my shit. But he knew better, and his proprietary insight was the share, right? And so my message to people out there is we all sit in the stream of data. That's where proprietary insights come from. Now, this is actually weirdly a data-driven, loosely defined concept because the data is the data of your life. I grew up here. I saw my proprietary insight that changed my life was that my mother had a GED as an adult.
right,
And I was second. I saw her go back to college and get 2 master's degrees. I was like, well, what if I did it on purpose? Now, just because nobody had, or some people had, I suppose, but I can't find them. And I decided to do it. Everyone listening to me right now has a proprietary insight that is either the genesis of a new business, a new way of doing things, or maybe it's a promotion, but we dismiss them because we raise the bar on what we think it takes to launch a business. And that's why
yeah.
I'm so passionate
It's
about
because
it.
we get caught up in the whole Forbes Inc. entrepreneur. I mean, like everybody's got to be some super fabulous entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you mentioned about Airbnb. Like, if somebody had come to me 20 years ago to say, like, I want to start up a company and we're going to use a mobile app so you can call a complete stranger to come and pick up your daughter to take her to another movie theater. I'd be like, are you out of your fucking mind? There's no way I'm going to invest in something like that. I mean, well, because I don't have that kind of thing. But I tell you what, I can, you talk about proprietary insight. I am a full believer that every business can be improved, and I think in 2023, you can still be a blacksmith in certain areas of this country and do a little bit better than the blacksmith down the road and be that much of a and be able to build a little business off of that. There's no limitations to that.
And I'm glad,
Um,
because I tell my students, I teach at HBS, and I always say, like, just be careful. We fetishize and deify, the founders, entrepreneurs is 10 million or 5 million. And it's like, bypass the object of the exercise is to feed yourself and take care
sure.
of your family, provide a good life, go on vacation a couple of times a year, maybe have a meal, a bill, right? Like, I stay very low to the ground around, do not stray too far from the object of the exercise, because I still feel like it could all be taken away from me at any point. And we dismiss sometimes these great little nuggets, like you said. I'll be the better blacksmith with one little iteration. Maybe I'll be the blacksmith who gives free coffee. Maybe I'll be the blacksmith with a subscription plan, and
Right.
you get unlimited shoes done, whatever the hell,
I don't think
and
a blacksmith makes
nobody
shoes, by the way. Just want to be clear, but unless you're a horse, but that's okay.
no, I the blacksmith
That's a
and the
cobbler.
cobbler could combine together in one. Yeah, no, I know, but literally in my mind, I'm like, I wouldn't want to just do blacksmith, but if we can make a blacksmith and a cobbler, but maybe my point of it is what you just said. There's always a way to level up or improve upon a business, but we're actually not mentored that, and I think it does a disservice, because the typical person who's listening to this has dismissed many a good idea, because now here's the flip side, back to lazy. This is
Mhm.
the fact pattern, the majority fact pattern that I get presented with. Somebody would hear me give this speech, they'll try to get in touch with me on Instagram. I have an idea that electrical vehicles are going to make us have to reinvent gas stations. They're going to be these mini little malls. It's going to be so go do it, and I'll take some equity. It's like,
Yes.
ideas are bullshit and cheap, and that's where the majority of people do fall down. And then they wonder, how come my patent never got bought out by a patent troll? I'm like, patents are nothing. They're garbage, right? Like,
Yeah.
so now that's a little tough talk and honest talk. Like, starting on a rescue mission, I'll give you some of the codes and maybe answer a couple discrete questions. But like, you got to do the work. I've been killing. I was saying this to my kids the other day. Like, I think I've been working at least 40 hours a week since I was 11.
Yeah.
And I don't say that for me. I'm proud of the compounding of that 40 hours a week. But like, the my career and my business and my wealth are not a byproduct of great ideas. It's of a vast amount of hard work.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
I got a whole range of kids. They're 14 to 22.
Okay. So, I have 3 kids and they're in their 20s. And they all have, one's a vet and one's an engineer and one's an accountant, and they're doing great. They work. I mean, I always bristle when people like shit on the millennial generation, because I realize, I'm sure like any generation, there's a percentage of people of a certain age that don't work that hard, but I see them and I see their friends and all that, and they are workers. And I don't know, man. One of the things I've just always learned is that the world has a big shortage of doers, and a lot of people come up with grand ideas to be multimillionaires or whatever, but there's just not enough people that just say, well, okay, that's a great idea. So I need, who's going to execute that idea? So when you do have people coming to you with that, you must shake your head a lot and think to yourself, well, yeah, I'm sure that'd be great, but let me see you put it in action first before I get excited about
Yeah,
it.
I always say, like, your job as somebody who's got a great idea or wants to launch a business, if you, first of all, don't lobby people for approval or validation more than necessary to advance to the next phase. I find a lot of people spend pointless energy trying to convince others, and I'm like, why did you need their buy-in, right? So I'm always analyzing even my attempts to get buy-in, when I'm like, what do I care if you agree with me, right? The reason why you don't agree with me is because you don't see the opportunity that I do. When people come to me around that fact pattern, it is also a byproduct of, we have, on a positive note, we've told people like everything's accessible. You can learn anything and watch any video on YouTube. People sometimes think that learning or knowing or associating with it is a proxy for doing, and it isn't. Just because you're around it, you read it, you study it, you watch my partner Gary Vaynerchuk's hustle culture videos, didn't make you an entrepreneur. And so we have come to devalue experience a bit and hard work. And I think that sometimes is selling people fool's gold, right? Because then they wake up like, I watched every video on YouTube from
Yeah.
this guru, and yet I'm still not rich.
Gary Vaynerchuk is a perfect example of that. He comes from a background. His family had a wine and liquor store. He works fucking hard every day. He has his own investor firm, a VC firm, his own PR and communications. You know him because you know him. And that is a guy that can talk about stuff because he's actually doing it. And of course, there's a whole world of people that talk about stuff and they're not even doing anything. So that's something that, it's I don't know. It's the world needs
Yeah,
doing. And I think that
right.
the point in your book, I think, is well taken. More questions for you. Um, you have a whole section about, about your anxiety basically and optimizing your mental health. You come across as a very like chilled out guy and dealing with my stuff and everything's fine and here I am. And I don't know you very well. I guarantee you that you go driving around in your car pissed off about something, something's on your mind, some person's pissing you off. There's always shit that's like floating around, and we all do, no matter how put together we seem, beneath the surface. There's a lot. And I have a really good client, Matt, that him and his two brothers run a manufacturing company in Trenton, actually. They're like a $30 million a year business. They have about 150 employees. And he says that the worst day of the year for me every year is New Year's Day because I gotta wake up on New Year's Day and say, like, oh shit, I gotta start all over again. And this company, because you're only as good as the last thing you do. And this company's been around for 25 years. They've got orders and backlog, but it's only like 2 to 3 months out. And then it's like a cliff, you know? And he always says to me,
Yeah.
like, I shit myself because what if there is a cliff and we fall over it? I don't know what's out there. You know what I mean? And this is a guy who's been successfully running a business for over 2 decades. So we all have that. So you talk a little bit about, we have a whole chapter about, dealing with anxiety and optimizing it, and auditing your body and your mind. So give us some thoughts on dealing with anxiety and stress.
And I like that you said I do manifest in the world as calm and collected, well spoken. You've seen me
Yeah.
on Shark Tank. You would know I was crumbling with imposter syndrome, and I bring it up to say there's a difference between being emotionally regulated, which I am highly emotionally regulated and in control of myself, and having to manage anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think we don't distinguish anxiety. We're in a culture now, which is amazing, which we talk openly about mental health, and we're all trying to get healed and cured and coddled, right? But like that doesn't tell the full story. That anyone who does really hard things, like I love this story. 2 decades in the same business, $30 million business.
Yeah.
Most people who don't would presume like, man, that guy is living in Barbados.
He's got it made. He's printing money. He's what,
Right.
No, he's not.
I
He's shitting himself.
Yeah, people say that to me all the time. Like, Matt, why? I mean, were you just running up the score? I was like, no, I'm trying to touch the ceiling of my potential, right? I don't know what it is yet. And
Right.
so I think I want to call out anxiety because if you were to attempt to fully extinguish your anxiety, you would extinguish your drive. I'm 100% positive. And so I wanted to try to find a way to articulate in the book, and I call it the Lurch Dodds rule of optimal anxiety, a study going back to the 1920s about the fact that there is a state of anxiety which is enough to propel you to pursue your best, and too much where you're crippled and paralyzed. Rather than me just give empty platitudes on an Instagram post, I tell the story in the book that's very humiliating of me going on this wonderful, happy show called Shark Tank, which everybody would be like, why are you stressed about that? But I show up in the world the way I am, and I had my own personal reasons about what I was going through at the time. And I talked about how I managed imposter syndrome. So the purpose of that chapter is to make the point there is an optimal anxiety level of anxiety. Do not extinguish it. And number two, here's how to identify the difference between a catalytic anxiety and derailing, paralyzing anxiety. And I have toggled between both of those. And so, but I will, important for anyone listening is trying to reconcile the concepts of being well spoken or manifesting. It's about being emotionally regulated. It's about doing what it takes to be able to, like, all right, I mean, I'm talking to you right now and somebody got 3 hours sleep last night because I'm dealing with a situation with my companies that I keeps me hyper aroused, like, God damn, I got to deal with something about it. But anyway, I love that chapter in the book because that's the part that people will respond to me, say, you don't usually have somebody of your success or stature, whatever that means, talking about, anxiety or imposter syndrome. And that's what I really set out to do with the book, is like, I want to tell stories in a way that people can relate to. Don't connect with me as a white rich guy in Shark Tank, but as a kid who ate government cheese at 16, still recovering from some of that trauma. And let me tell it through storytelling and not through a prescriptive book that is very boring and redundant by chapter 6. One thing I'm very proud of with the book, I think that chapter 9, 8, 9 are even stronger than chapter 1, and I kind of wanted to finish even harder. And I think a lot of business books, you're like, oh, chapter 3, really useful. Last 6 could have been a blog post.
No. I agree. It keeps up the quality all the way through. And that book on managing, the chapter on managing your anxiety, is a later chapter in the book.
Yeah.
Even later in the book, is a chapter about partners. We only have a few minutes left, and I because this interests me so much. You, over the course of your life, you have made investments in people. You have hired people, not in companies. You have hired people. You have worked with many different personalities, both in professional sports and in the business world, and combination. So you've gotten some experience in evaluating and, figuring out people. So listen, you're a young guy. You're in your late 40s, so you've got a lot of deals ahead of you, and you don't seem like the kind of guy that's going to retire and go to some, Caribbean island someday. You're going to be doing this till you're 85 years old. So you've got some partners ahead of you. So you've had 20, 30 years to learn. Give me some thoughts on evaluating prospective partners. Who are the people that you meet that, and this is in your book, you've got some thoughts on it here, but give me some your thoughts now on people that you meet that you're like, this person is the kind of person I can be in business with, versus this is not the kind of person I would want to be in business with.
Yeah, rather than make this scripted, I'll just free associate what comes to mind when you're
Please.
asking me, and I'll talk about the evolution of my thinking a little bit. But the number one thing that gets me excited, and when something, it triggers some part of my brain, the primitive part that says, "Oh, that you have the just figure it out gene," the kind of person that everyone else says about, "Oh, Bob or Sally, like they just figure it out."
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one of the most valuable qualities. We call that grit or scrap, but it's more than that. It's a crazy combination of somebody who's, has great EQ and navigates through tough situations. So just figure it out. I look for people who have a rare blend of what I call confidence and humility. And people sometimes think those are in opposition. They actually feed each other because, as you know, the business 5 years after it was founded resembles very little of the original pitch deck.
True.
A successful business is the byproduct of endless pivots and iterations. So I look for who has the propensity to make the pivots, not the presence of the pivots, but the propensity, because that's the future predictor, right? And what I believe predicts and shows propensity is confidence, because a confident, self-possessed person will be like, all right, it's not working out. They're willing to look within to audit the problems as opposed to amplify the hyperbole, right?
Sure.
And humility to say, I get stuff wrong and I'm willing to course correct. Those matter because I think the universe is very benevolent. It always gives you one last shot to save your ass. And we all know that moment where it's like, damn it, if I didn't write the check, I knew I shouldn't have done it, or damn it, I shouldn't have married that person, or damn, whatever. The universe gives you one chance. I'm looking for the qualities that predict whether somebody will course correct. And so over the years, though, despite what I'm saying to you, I found all sorts of reasons to compromise those views. Well, but this idea is so great, it'll probably work out. Well, I'll fix them.
Yeah.
And I'm a little more seasoned and some gray hairs and just 48 years old. I realize you're right about your prism. You're wrong in the application.
Right.
And you need to stick with the application more at this part, because I'm getting more tired. Every human being gets a little more exhausted by fixing things. But two, it's a little grandiose to think you're always going to change people and you're going to fix the situation. So I'm actually looking for more partners where I can bask in the glory and the reflective glory of how wonderful they are. I look for people who humble me in some important way where I recognize, oh, I do not possess that. Let's use Gary Vaynerchuk for a second. Not only is Gary an incredible trend spotter, and the deal I did with him is probably enough for us to just shut down the company. Like, I don't have to do work because of the check I wrote at that bagel store in 2009. Gary sleeps 8 hours a night, could be making the most incredible incoming of people doubting he's sincere or even have an actual problem. And he sleeps on it like a baby because he's completely at ease with who he is and does not need a single other person to agree, even though I think he loves the adulation, right? He's an extra.
Fair enough.
And so here's why I'll summarize why that's important. Look for people who humble you in a way, not that you envy them or you reject yourself, but let you know that there's even better versions of you out there that you can maybe strive to approximate a little bit better. That's how I've changed more. I realize I can make my process a lot more efficient when I see somebody who's doing something that I really regard or think is amazing, and they do it absolutely better than I could. I lean further into that. Whereas before, I leaned into situations where I could fix the person or save the person.
It's great advice. And it's helpful when trying to evaluate somebody. In the end, it's funny as people get older. You just mentioned about, you lose a little bit of energy to fix stuff all the time. You get tired of doing that. if you're 28, you have a lot of hunger to do that. When you're 48, 58, 68, you lose it. And maybe that's why so many people, as they grow older, they become more of investors or partners, or minority partners or silent partners, and they let the younger generation actually do. And the older generation provides the capital for them to do what they got to do. And who knows?
Yeah,
Maybe it's
I actually think too, what we lose in maybe a little bit of energy and a little bit of willingness to eat crap,
we
we
got the
gain
brains.
we gain in efficiency through pattern recognition, right? It'll take me, I will arrive there twice as fast as somebody half my age because I have pattern recognition that they don't. So I actually think there's a reason why the average entrepreneur is 42 years old when they launch their business, because pattern recognition is more important than energy or hunger. It just
Yep,
is.
I
And so
agree.
I think we have the benefit of maybe older now, but I
You
actually
are
really do believe it. And I
at
might,
48, you are chat GPT. You've been trained on all this data at least through September of 2021, so that you can actually use that.
no, but I really, I'm chat GP, and I've been stripped of my dignity several times. So I'm chat GPT without a
With
big ego.
humility.
Yeah, I'm a dangerous, deadly assassin, right? Because I have nothing to lose anymore. And I'm not ashamed.
One final question, and I'll let you go. And again, we've covered some what's in the book, but only a fraction. So, for any of you guys who are watching this, listening to this, we're tip of the iceberg stuff. But Matt, you do talk. You did make one comment near the end of the book about taking big leaps, not incremental progress,
I love this. Yeah,
which fascinates me. But God, so many things that are so different between you and me, because you are a risk taker and I'm an accountant. So to me, it's always incremental progress. Like as long as we're moving forward, that's the right way to do it. And you're like, no, fuck that. If you're gonna do it, you got to do it big, and you got to take big. Talk to me a little bit about why you think that's important.
yeah, love this topic. Very, very passionate about this topic. And again, talking to my children, I always say, look, whenever you're confronting a problem or a situation or an opportunity, always choose defiance before you choose acceptance, because you can't go back and go and choose defiance after the fact, but you can always choose acceptance at any point. So I choose to have reality jam down my throat when
Right.
I need to. And that's the bias. So this relates to what I'm talking about with incrementalism versus step change. Those are the words, right? There is a subcurrent running throughout our lives in society, the invisible rules, as I call them, that are operating upon us. And one of the most powerful ones is this bias towards incrementalism. And there's a reason why. Incrementalism simply means first you must do this before you get to do this. It goes back to the Taylor method in the factory, and it goes back to corporate hierarchies, right? It's very efficient to organize human beings according to these bands. It's the reason why I never became a lawyer when I was supposed to go to SCAD and ARPS after I graduated law school. And I'm like, how long will it take for me to make a partner? And I'm like, well, typically, you get there in 11, but if you really outshine, you can get to 8. And I'm like, well, how do I outshine? Well, 2,300 hours a year. And I was like, well, what happens when I beat my colleague and I'm just better? Like, you might be track, right? And I was like, well, here's the advance. I will not be being a lawyer. So here's the point. You should always question whether this is an opportunity for me to do a step change. In other words, let me eschew the hierarchy, the presumed hierarchy, and attempt, can I launch the business today, even though I've never had my own business before? I tell this incredible story in the book about a Harvard student named Alex, who was a special operator in the U.S. military, was just an incredibly brilliant human being, Harvard MBA, and understands how innovation should be deployed, right? He really wanted to create his own fund. But he comes to my office on the eve of taking a soul-crushing job at a big New York private equity firm. And he's like, hey, I start my job, next week. And I'm like, you don't look happy. He's like, well, I really wish I could start my own firm. I'm like, well, why can't you? He goes, well, I've never been a managing director in a fund before. I was like, well, I've written hundreds of checks. I didn't know. Is that a rule? Should that be part of my career? He's like, well, I mean, Matt, the generally you have to be a managing director. I was like, I don't know. If I were you, I'd go raise money. He goes, well, who's going to give me money? I said, nobody, until somebody does. Anyway, long story short, 3 months later, calls me back, asks me, guys, I know you read this in the book. And I said, size for what? He goes, I'm going to send you some swag. What are you going to send me swag for? The firm I created when I walked out of your office. Now, the story gets better. This just happened 3 days ago. I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, a story about this kid, Alex, from Harvard Business School, who's a special operator, who just raised
This same
69
Alex you're
million.
talking about in the just
Yeah,
3 days ago? Okay, keep going.
just came out 3 days ago, how that kid raised $69 million, much of it from JP Morgan, to do round 2 of his fund. And so I'm saying, anybody listening here, this is not a rejection of expertise. It's quite the opposite. It's an embrace of your own assessment of your expertise, regardless of things that you believe you must first do. ask yourself, who made the rule? And two, do I believe the rule? Can I overcome the rule? I'll simplify it, right? I graduated from Queens College, with a degree. It's a city school. It took me 7 years. I went to Florida Law, pretty good school, but not Harvard. 4 years a night, was on law review, right? I always wanted to be at a top academic institution and teach and scratch that itch, right? The incrementalist approach would be that I would teach at Queens College. That would take 2 seconds. The more would have been teach at Fordham Law, take a little longer, but probably teach there. I wanted to teach at the best place in the world I could think of, and that was Harvard Business School. It took me a year of my life to put together that course. And now it's one of the top-rated intensive programs at the school, most popular. That's the point of increment. You will never know what could have been possible if you don't have a bias towards both defiance and step change before you submit to the invisible rules.
The book is called Burn the Boats, Toss Plan B Overboard and Unleash Your Full Potential. I've been speaking to Matt Higgins, the author. Matt, thank you very much. It was a great conversation. The book is fantastic. I want to wish you the best of luck with it. And I'm sure we're going to continue to hearing a lot more about you as you, over the next 40 years, continue to develop and build businesses.
The work of my life and so passionate. So if you read it, DM me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I read every single message because that's the thing that makes me work harder the next day. So it won't disappear. People are always like, you read these? I'm like, every one of them. So let me know what you think.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck. Let's definitely stay in touch. All right. Everybody, you have been watching BizBooks. My name is Gene Marks. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to see more interviews with great authors and smart business leaders like Matt, please join us every other week for a new episode. Thanks again for watching or listening. We'll see you again soon. Take care.